insight conversation as a part of the ATL Education Expo. I am here with Andrey Hill, who is the program coordinator for the Georgia Charter School Association, specifically working on the GaTAPP certification program for teachers coming into Georgia. Andrey, thank you so much for being with me today and chatting it up.
Thank you for having me in.
So these conversations have gotten really interesting and a lot of fun. First and foremost, because we love to hear the stories of how people actually got into their roles in education. And so I'd love to start there and hear about what got you into education in the first place, and what were those first couple of stops like for you?
All right. So my first stop in education was as a tutor at it was City of Refuge over in Atlanta's Bankhead community.
Yeah.
So one of the requirements, I was a public policy major, and one of the requirements as to complete that major was we had to begin service projects. And so through Hands-On Atlanta, I began to go to the City of Refuge and help children with their homework, primarily helping them also with just early literacy foundations. And so had not a clue, no formal teacher training or anything, just knew that, that was, of all the service projects, that was the one that was struck my fancy, if you will, or
Yeah,
most
sure.
interesting. And with that, I found um, it was a very eye-opening experience. I'm an Atlanta native, and I would say, for the first time, that was me getting the insight into, some of the inequities in education, because I noticed that several of the students there, just weren't, be it, just academic support or socio-emotional support, that just was lacking in many regards. And I'll never forget when I went home that day, it was just it was aha, just an aha moment, like, wow, like this is okay.
Right.
And I mean, from that, I began to really commit to, those students, and just whatever I could do in my limited capacity, as a tutor there, just supporting them, because I mean, many of the staff, said the way the students responded to me was a little bit different than previous volunteers
That's
at the respective facility. So from there, I continued to do like volunteer projects in Atlanta public schools, and just really just on any given Saturday or time that I had, away from class in undergrad, I would go tutor. And I'll never forget, one of the teachers there recommended that I go into substitute teaching. And the caveat for me was, okay, the money part, but I mean, as a college student, but I, took that pillage into substitute teaching. And again, just in terms of student responsiveness, as a substitute teacher, it really just kind of it really, empowered me to just believe that, teaching was my calling
mm.
at the time. And so, that was kind of the beginning steps, I would say, and it just opened up just a whole path from there.
You're the first person that I've talked with. We talked with a wide variety of folks. A lot of people who started in the classroom. But the first person who started as a substitute teacher. What was that like? I mean, I feel like substitute teaching is something we don't talk a ton about, and it's really hard. And a lot of times, it's hard to even find substitutes. Most teachers are usually discouraged from even taking days off where they need substitutes. But I'd love to know, what was the first class you substitute taught for, and how did that go?
The first class that I substitute taught for, well, it was in Metro Atlanta, and I'll never forget, the building went on lockdown the day, like the first, within 2 hours of me being there, due to a perceived threat.
Yeah, yeah,
And I just remember like much of the angst with many of the students
yeah.
during that time. But I mean, in the forefront of my mind, it was very much, is everybody safe? You know, are we good? You
Right.
know, that was just locking step for my first mind, just really trying to just calm them to make sure everything, you know, was okay, and just checking in with them consistently until the lockdown was lifted. So in my mind, it was just more so of, okay, what can I do from an emotional standpoint, you know, to make sure that these kids are okay? Because I saw a lot of anxiety kind of tense up in the room.
What was the age group?
That was very interesting.
Yeah. What age group were you
High
teaching to?
school, high
Okay,
school, high
gotcha. And
school. Yes,
what was the subject
sir.
class?
The subject, that was a science class. It was a science class.
Gotcha.
And just, yeah, from the substitute standpoint, I would say that a lot of the work that I did, because I mean, I was, again, a junior in college. Maybe I maybe necessarily hadn't mastered, you know, content or pedagogy at the time, but you know, if nothing else, from substitute teaching, I learned the value of relationships with students, because I mean, you literally, it's an 8 hour or 6 hour edition, excuse me, you know, to really make some kind of impression by the end of the day for some child in that building. And so, you know, that's really what I equated to, is just, you know, a 6 hour audition, you know, and depending upon how you like the vibe of the respective school, you know, of course, at that time I wasn't thinking long-term employment or anything to that effect, but you know, with that, you know, rapport that you establish with the students, a lot of time that will lead a rapport with the staff, which will in turn, you know, cause them to want you to be back in the building. And, you
Mhm.
know, you're establishing, you know, what I deem to be meaningful relationships for with the students in the long
Right.
run.
That's so wow. That's an incredible first impression into the education system. So what happened after? I mean, you were studying at university, and then what'd you do after you graduated?
After I graduated, I enrolled in a Master's of Art teaching program. Actually, let me back up. So, Ian, you'll like this. You'll like this story. So I applied to Teach for America,
Oh no.
and I oftentimes forget this, but it's through your failures that you learn a lot.
Yeah.
So I remember I applied for Teach for America, and I did the phone interview, and I just remember it being several people on the call, and I just bombed it tremendously. I had no sense of anything,
Yeah. Yeah.
sweating even though it was on the phone, you know.
Yeah.
So I would Teach for America reject.
We've ended
But
up inadvertently, and I should have thought more about this. A lot of these conversations have been with people who got into education through TFA, but
yeah.
say that the only reason I got accepted, and TFA, like any organization, has its pluses and minuses and everything, but um, I was heavily coached before I applied. I had a couple friends who had already gone through it, and that's that. If I know some TFA folks are gonna watch this, but they know that how this goes. Like sometimes your friends and you, so you
uh,
don't feel bad in any way about that. That's a funny historical footnote. Yeah.
Yeah, I was thrown to the wolves, you know, and you know, it was a learning experience though, because I mean, you know, I can always reflect back on it, and you know, now that I work with several Teach for America candidates, you know, it feels good to still have, you know, an impact on the core, you know, in many regards. So I
Yeah, yeah,
mean, it couldn't have happened without, you know,
yeah.
this happening. So it's
It's
perfect.
like they let me in, so that's not bad. I don't respect any organization that would have me as a member. I think that's how that quote goes. All right, so you started a master's program, and you went through a master's program. Was that here in Metro Atlanta too?
So it was here in Metro Atlanta. So we went through the master's program here. It was actually through Walden, but I did my student teaching in Metro Atlanta. And so I will admit that, you know, when I began my student teaching portion of the program, uh, that at the time was the longest commitment, if you will, I had to a school.
Mm,
And I'll never forget, I was teaching a group of seventh grade boys, all boys, math. And I mean, it was just a really tumultuous. Like I really didn't think that they, enjoyed anything that I was trying to do in terms of structures and teaching, or just I was the enemy. That's what I felt.
Mhm.
And what through that semester, with them in time, it just really, especially like at the time we had the CRCT here in the state of Georgia,
Yeah,
criterion reference testing,
yeah,
before milestones. And I'll never forget, that several of them, you could tell that the success they experienced, just in on a day to day in the classroom, the praise that I was giving them, and the success, true academic success that they were experiencing. That it was a first time for many, and I would say overall, the light bulb went off, because at one point I'll never forget, I called my mom and I told her, I think that we collectively wasted our money on this degree, because I'm over it, and but it's, I don't know what was in the stars that day, but I promise you the next week, they were just really, really into, what I was trying to do as their teacher, and really appreciative of, um, just the role that I played, I would say, and
yeah.
just I mean, for many it was their first time experiencing success, or just in my mind, somebody that actually truly cares for them, in the education setting. So,
Right.
I think that right when I was ready to quit, it's like the twinkle in the kid's eyes just kind of went off, like, oh,
Yeah.
you're great.
Universe had to send you a signal back at some point.
Yeah, totally. Because I was ready. I was like, this is not the field for me.
Yeah. I know that feeling. I mean, I feel like anybody who starts in the classroom at any point, you nobody has success out of the gate. You just try your best,
Mhm.
and to your point, it's all about relationships. It's all about consistency and just being there. And I taught ninth grade my first year too, or I taught ninth grade my first year, and it the first couple months they're testing you. Any group of students, no matter where they're from, are testing you just to like see, one, are you going to be here next week? Two, like, who are you? Because I think, and this is where I think we don't talk about this enough. I'm curious if you agree with me on this, but the system itself hasn't changed a ton. We talk about that a lot, right? How the structures are relatively the same. We all know those need to change. We'll talk about that, but I also think we don't talk enough about how culture has changed a bit. And like
Right.
my parents' generation, the teacher was sort of a arbitrary authoritarian figure that people just sort of respected for the most part, and you accepted their instruction. And I think our students today don't grow up with that necessarily like arbitrary reverence. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing either. It's because they're discerning and they're perceptive, and they want to see, like, are you authentic? Are you being yourself? Do you actually care about us, or do you just care about being you and being IT? Right. And I think that puts people in uncomfortable positions, but ultimately it tends to lead to deeper relationships in my mind. Do you
Absolutely.
agree with that? Do you think that's in the right direction?
I I agree with that statement wholeheartedly. I can. It's even, I would say, down to the elementary level, because I was one of those ninth graders, Ian, that let me see what's going on. But even down to elementary. I've worked with kindergarten students, and you can tell, like, early on, what they know, whether or not a teacher cares about them and is into them, and then a lot of times they just aren't going to accept it just because.
Right.
So I definitely agree with that statement. And I mean, you have to set up that environment, or that I would say that culture of reciprocity, in terms of respect, and to truly get these kids to where they need to be.
Yeah, I think that's valuable because, and it's why when I talk to people who are about to be teachers, the first thing I tell them is like the most important thing to do is show up as yourself. Like you have to be authentic,
Absolutely,
because
absolutely,
nobody's more perceptive than a child, and they'll see immediately if you're being fake. And
absolutely.
to your other point, I have two quick stories to share, and I want to let you talk way more, but you keep prompting me.
I'm
When I
listening.
was
I'm listening.
I was doing like summer training, and I was teaching a class of like 9 kids at science, like summer school or something. And my first week was not great. Like I felt like they didn't really vibe with me. I was kind of putting on a front too, but I started like getting into it, and one day I was like really hard on two of the boys in the class, just like hard in the sense of really trying to redirect their energies towards the work. And of course, that was the day that my mentor, like coach, was gonna survey all the kids about, hey, how's Mr. Cohen doing? And I was like,
Ooh.
God damn, gonna be the worst. And those two students actually gave me the highest ratings and wrote in their comments, they're like, and they left that class like angry at me. But in their comments though, they said, you know, Mr. Cohen, like he really tries to give us structure and like has high expectations for us, you know, and I think anybody who teaches knows that that stuff means a lot. And you just kind of got to power through because kids are kids, right? They're gonna have up days, they're gonna be down days, they got all other kinds of stuff going on. I remember when I was a kid, like most of the time I wasn't thinking about my teacher, I was thinking about, you know, the girls I was sitting next to or sports. Yeah, I mean, like
Right.
it was all me.
Yeah.
It was like I'm the center of the
You're right.
universe. And so it was just a powerful moment. And the other story I was going to share is I was my first year of teaching. I was in my planning period, and I heard kids running down the hall. Obviously, kids should not be running in the hall in between during class. And so I stepped out in the hallway, and I sort of stepped in front of one of them who was a student of mine in a different period. And I was like, "Hey, man," I won't share his name, but I pulled him inside. I was like, "Hey, what's going on? Like, why, you know, what are you doing? What class are you supposed to be in?" He told me, and I was like, "Why are you not going there?" Because I've seen him out in the halls before. And
Mhm.
he's like, "I don't know. I just don't know what's going on in those classes anymore. Like, you know, they suspended me. I'm so far behind. I can't even catch up. Um, you know, so what am I supposed to do?" And I was like, you know, we talked about that a little bit, and that, you know, that's a whole nother thing. But, um, you know, then he said to me, he's like, "Well, you know, I appreciate that you stopped me. You know, at least you care. Like nobody really cares at this point." And I was
There
like,
it is.
like it's not we you know there's no like it's so much simpler than most people make it out to be,
Yeah,
right? Like
I
kids are a
agree
lot
with that
smarter
statement.
and a lot more mature than we give them credit for.
You know, with me, I think a lot of times, you know, especially as we, you know, get older and grow into, you know, our respective selves, a lot of times we forget, you know, what that experience was like. You know, I was a teacher that, you know, I'm participating in field day with you all. I need y'all to, you know, I need to make mistakes. You know, it's okay.
Right,
You know, let me show you what being a human is like. You
right,
know, because being an adult, this is automatically entitled me to, you know, dominion over or domain over your lives. You know, so
right.
you know, that definitely, you know, it matters. It matters for
Yeah.
sure.
So you were a teacher for how long, and how, you know, how did that all go ultimately?
So I was a teacher in the classroom for 10 years.
Wow.
Well, I maybe make the 10 year, maybe nine and a half,
Well,
something like that.
we'll give you a 10.
Um, yeah, we'll give me 10, right, right. And you know, throughout that time period, um, held in, you know, did various for the bulk of that, it was done as a special education. And also I taught a couple of years in the general education setting, all on the elementary level. Well, I did do middle school as well.
Mhm.
The academy I was at was a K through 8 academy, so I was responsible for some middle school children there at the school.
Gotcha.
So
So tell me about the special education experience, because I feel like, you know, like a lot of things, it's just another corner of the education space that needs more attention. And I'd love to hear your, you know, just like what was that experience like, and what are some of the things you took away from it? Is like if structurally we might want to think about changing some of these things.
So, I mean, just from a day-to-day, you know, experience in the special education classroom, one of the things that I've learned, you know, is just the art of reset. You know, a lot of times, you know, students come to us regardless of ability level. They come to us with all various things, you know, outside of school. They only spend 6 hours with us. And so, you know, with that, you know, I really had to kind of do a lot of self-learning during the initial stages of special education. Just, you know, those first 3 years, I would say for sure, it was just a lot of just unpacking self and realizing I can control, how I'm responding to certain situations. Initially, I didn't know that. I didn't feel like I was in control, or, and the reality is that you're not in control of everything. So I would definitely say it took a lot of just self demands of special education are a lot. I mean, you start with the baseline of, federal guidelines and policy that go around that. Then on the school level, you have, on a district level, there may be, one way they interpret it. And then in your school building, it may be a whole different level, that they interpret it. So it's kind of like layers upon layers upon layers.
Right.
And then that's just legal guidelines. I'm not even talking about instructions just yet. So that's, that's one thing that kind of, it was like, okay, make sure you're well versed in the legalese, if you will, of special education,
Right.
and then take that pivot to instruction. And I mean, it sucks because you would think it would be backwards, but that's the lay of the land.
Yeah.
But with that, with that knowledge of, a lot of the legalese, if you will, it made me a stronger advocate for students outside of the classroom, outside of my area. So if I'm serving as their case manager, or, I'm working in any instructional capacity for a student, and I feel like, the least restrictive environment is not being honored with fidelity by other professionals in the building, then
Right.
okay, I'm now equipped to be a great advocate for the student. And why they need to have, as I don't want to say as normal, but as least restrictive, if you will, as an education as possible.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to flip that, because I mean, I feel like if I had continued on that initial path of learning, or just really just my hands are tied, it would not have bode well long term for me to have the career that I've had in teaching. I just had to kind of flip it and say, okay, well, how how can I use this to enlighten other individuals in the building who may not know? I mean, growing up, there was a perception of special education that um, it's totally broken down. It's so funny because when I was in school, special education literally was, the kids that, you don't see them, you don't see them until it's time to get on the bus, and
Right.
that's it. And maybe you'll see them, walk into the cafeteria to, I'm a DeKalb County kid, so the trailer at the back of the school,
Mhm.
at the time. So, and what's funny though is that I remember at the school that I told you about earlier, the school I first substituted at, the special education coordinator remembered me when I was in elementary school,
Wow.
and I'll never forget that. You know, she said that she just talked about how my mom was a big advocate for me, early on, because when I was in first grade, it was like, oh, let's test this kid for special education. And she said she'll never forget how my mother came in there, and really served as an advocate for me. And next thing you know, it's like, let's test this kid for gifted instead, not which is a form of special education.
Right.
So she actually encouraged me in her building to explore, what the special education, this is so many years later from when I was in elementary school,
Yeah.
to just see what the special education, mainly because a lot of the, I feel like under IDA, many of the, which is a federal special education law, many of the people I feel like for the most part, spirit of the law in many regards. In many regards,
Say that one more time.
I say I feel like like in many regards, just comparing special education policy and implementation, we'll say 20 years ago when I was in school versus now, I feel like the spirit of the law is slowly.
Mm.
Did you get that?
It's funny. It keeps pausing you at like the key crunch line or punch line that you say. But I kind of like you were talking about how the spirit of the law is sort of eroding a little bit, and maybe people are not thinking about it in the same way, right?
I would say that it's stable. It's unstable again. With the I would say in many regards, especially around advocates, more of the spirit of the law is coming into fruition with many of our
Oh, okay.
students.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That's just my experience, and I mean because I see a greater role of advocates and you know parental involvement. I mean, but
Oh,
it takes
yeah.
the right
Yeah, for
connections
sure,
to
for sure. I mean,
yeah.
I think people are realizing that advocacy in general is super critical to the outcome of a student, right? And to your point,
Absolutely.
people don't even realize that special education and IDEA includes gifted and talented, right? It's like it includes both of
Absolutely.
these things, yeah, it's a wonder that we don't push that more. But to your point, I think conversations are very different today than they ever have been before. So there's progress there. So you transitioned out of the classroom to where did you go after that? Did you go straight to GCSA after the classroom?
Yes, yes. I went straight to GCSA after. So Georgia Charter Schools Association began as a program specialist, and so in a program specialist role, it is and was my dream job at the time because I always knew that um, you, I always felt that I had kind of the disposition to really make an impact across many teachers. I just felt that affect and how I could influence teams, how I could lead IEP meetings, how I could you know really mediate some at times some very dicey situations between parents, teachers, administrators, whatever. I just felt like I was always kind of that person that could come into a situation and make everybody walk out on a win-win type situation. But I didn't feel like progressing into an administrative role in a building would allow me to continue that because I think at some point, as an admin, you have to play good cop, bad cop within the building, depending upon what the needs are for that building at any given time. So for me, it was a dream job in the sense of I could really just work with develop teacher and work in teacher development, really just kind of share my experience with teachers and really first understand various you know things that teachers are going through, understand their context, the frame of mind they come to a teaching,
Right.
and unpack that and kind of meld it, with my influence and as to what we believe is in the best interest of students. So I always said I wanted a position like that, and I, said it for many years, and it just happened. So it literally just happened.
Before we get to my future of education question, I'd love to know a little reflection of like now you've been working supporting teachers as opposed to being one. What have you noticed? Are there themes that have come up as like teachers always struggle with this, or more and more teachers are coming in with this? What are some things you're seeing now from being sort of somebody who helps shepherd people into the classroom?
Pre-COVID or post-COVID?
Let's go with pre-COVID.
Yeah, okay, we'll go with pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Uh, Pre-COVID, I would say, hmm, pre-COVID, I felt like it was more of many teachers just needed many of the teachers because a lot of my teachers are that I work with now, they are career switchers. So they're people that may come from corporate America
Yeah.
to the teaching field. They've, or they may work in social work, medicine, law. We have a very diverse array of teachers that come to us as career switchers. And I would say, well, one, just the biggest thing I've noticed is that education does kind of work in a silo. But in terms of their needs, a lot of times I think that, you can, many of us come into this field, with the, savior mentality, and, like, it's just, but what I would say most have with their own self-awareness first. And I feel like that's kind of been the biggest area of just unpacking, yourself, and realizing, what's most important, which is the students.
Right.
So a lot of times they lose, a lot of times it's they, but we don't understand that they're our, students. Again, going back to when I was initially a special education teacher, it was very much I could blame, but I'm where do I step in and take responsibility for this? So really across needs, because when I work with teachers, I'm also working with school-based mentors. They are able to select in most cases that has demonstrated content or knowledge in their field, and the school administrators as well. And so in working with those teams collectively, teachers just need to know, especially early on, they just need to know that somebody has got their back, because being in the classroom with the students is a lot. And so
Yeah.
if nothing else, I've seen, teachers that maybe weren't as proficient as I thought they should be, upon the initial stages, or, within time in the program. But at the heart of that, they know that I have their back. I just, and so with that, I would say that's just the biggest thing. Somebody there to have their back is the biggest thing, and and helping them, just navigate whatever that said context is within the various building, school district, what have you, because it's a lot. I've never seen one situation be the same in any case, but the most consistent factor is, hey, you got my back, I got your back. So we're good. So
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. I mean, because it's tough, it's like no matter how much training you have, no much prep or lack of prep, starting to become a teacher is really hard, and harder than
yes.
most other jobs because every day is different. You don't have it's not like starting a new office job where it's like, all right, yeah, the hardest part in the beginning is like figuring out a couple of relationships and how to access your email. But no, it's like your first day, your first minute of the first day is in front of 30 children who knows
It
what
comes with no manual.
Right, exactly. So I wanna close our conversation. It's been a lot of fun. We're finishing each conversation with this question about the future of education. And so, like good teachers, we're trying to plan backwards a little bit here. So thinking ahead to the year
Okay.
2050, so about 30 years from now, what do you think education should look like by that time?
Should look like.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm the emphasis on should. All right.
Also,
So I honestly believe that just thinking about what education was 1 year ago, before the pandemic hit, versus what it is now, I really believe in my hearts of hearts that the pandemic kind of sped up um a lot of what that should be, but then it also slowed it down. It also exposed many of the cracks in education.
okay.
So what that should be, we'll say should be, for many of the students, it is just very much tailored to their needs. Some students I found, have flourished, in the in the virtual environment, because, maybe the idea of, or the social stimuli of being in a school building is a bit much.
Right.
So, in many regards, that's an avenue for those respective students. I think that whew, it's going to require a lot more collaboration. I think, again, if we've learned nothing else, I'm talking about collaboration not just across the school building, but collaboration, across the home environment as well.
Yeah.
Many people learn that, teaching is not as easy as, you think it is. We're not just singing songs every day to students, and playing hand games. It's not quite that. So I think, with that, many people learn, what, the ins and outs of education, and, what all it takes. Are many of the things we're doing necessary? How can we make this more efficient for our learners? So in my mind, I think people are really going to kind of take a hold of or what it should look like. Let me go back to should. What it should look like is a I don't want to say like back to basics, but just an overall greater overlay of home and school.
Mm,
In many regards, teachers and parents actively partnering with each other to make sure they're meeting those students wherever
yeah,
they are, and just building from there. So I would say probably the should be just more individualized, personalized learning for students.
mm,
One of the most the idea of a IEP or individualized education plan was just a groundbreaking thing for me when I first learned about it. I was like, wow, so each student has one of these. And so, with that, if somebody say should, my should would be that every student would have an IEP that really kind of outlays, where they are. Everybody's looking at the document, signing off, just making sure they understand it and doing holding themselves responsible and collaborating around what each student needs. So that's my should for 2050.
no, that's totally fair. I've said it all the time too. I mean, people keep saying personalized learning, and special educators have been doing that kind of thing for a long time. And so we have
Absolutely.
like templates here. Not saying we want federal law to govern everybody's.
We don't want the federal law.
That there's a lot of problems with it, but the concept, yeah, I totally get that. Well, that's definitely been a theme that's come out of this, and it's been refreshing to hear your perspective, both how you got into education and what you've been doing along the way. So, Andrey, thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. Again, this is Andrey Hill, program coordinator of the GaTAPP certification program under the Georgia Charter School Association here in Georgia, and working and living here in Metro Atlanta. It's been awesome hearing your perspective. Thanks again for taking the time.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk soon.